So along with my co-author Tuan Wen, we published the article, The Relationship Between School Turnaround and Student Outcomes, a meta-analysis in the journal Educational Evaluation and Policy Analysis. So in recent decades, school turnaround has really emerged as a predominant strategy to improve chronically low performing schools. This approach has been controversial given that school turnaround emphasizes changes in the organization, management, and staffing within a school. Within school turnaround, there are four main models. The transformation model involves both replacing the principal and implementing a suite of strategies to improve school operations. In the turnaround model, in addition to these changes, a school must also rehire up to half of their instructional staff. The final two models, in the restart model, a school is then restarted under the management of either a charter management organization or an educational management organization. And then finally, and then really the most severe approach to turnaround is just to outright close a school and then to reassign students to other schools. So with this as just background context, the goal of this study is to conduct a meta-analysis to synthesize 35 studies that have examined the relationship between these various approaches to school turnaround and various student outcomes. And then, so just as a little bit of background, I think there has been largely within the research and policy literature an expectation that school turnaround has not been beneficial for student outcomes, in large part just because of how disruptive it is to school operations and as well as personnel within schools. So really counter to this narrative, we do find that school turnaround is associated with improved student attendance, improved standardized test scores in mathematics and English language arts, as well as high school graduation rates. And then a couple sub-findings really build on this overarching study finding. First is that when we break our results down by different models, we really find that the transformation, the turnaround, and the restart model are all equally effective in terms of their contribution to student test scores. So really don't suggest that one of these approaches is more beneficial than the others. Really sort of, we take this to mean that like it doesn't necessarily suggest that you need to replace teachers in a school to really instigate the type of changes that are envisioned within the school turnaround model. And then a second main finding that I can elaborate on if it's helpful, but across all turnaround models, our results show that the positive effects we observe only emerge after the first year of implementation, which again is sort of counter the expectation that principals with new teachers come in to really make drastic improvements, really find that making some of these changes hold and really influencing student outcomes does take at least 1 year to ground these efforts to really see more meaningful changes in student outcomes. So overall, there is a long-standing debate within educational policy as to whether it's more advantageous to target resources towards students' underlying barriers of success, or really should focus on improving teachers' instructional practice within schools or various school operations. And really with previous efforts to really comprehensively reform school operations as being somewhat underwhelming. So the results of this study really do provide some evidence that the intensive federal investments that did come with school turnaround can be beneficial for student outcomes, which overall really underscore the important role that the federal government can play in supporting school improvement in the most historically underserved schools within our country. Really a caveat that we want to highlight in terms of this overarching recommendation is that district and school stakeholders should weigh the benefits to student achievement that are associated with school turnaround against the disruption that the process can bring to school systems and communities. That was sort of the overarching finding. Also, in terms of more for a practitioner audience, that schools undergoing turnaround are often expected to see drastic improvements in student outcomes during the first year. So really with our finding that the positive effects don't emerge in the first year, it's only in years 2, 3, or 4. We urge district and school leaders to temper their expectations regarding the immediacy with which turnaround efforts can take hold and when these do actually lead to positive student outcomes. So really this idea that school reform is difficult work and it does take time for improvement efforts to take hold. So I think when we think about school turnaround overall, it does raise lots of really difficult questions for school systems, just because in addition to really carry out these drastic improvement efforts, it did involve the withdrawal of local control of schools. So really at the heart of this is this trade-off of whether there is the expectation of having greater resources from the federal government to spur this type of drastic change within schools versus some of the trade-offs in terms of what we expect in terms of local control of school decisions, local ownership and decision making around our public schools, like accountability within the lowest performing schools. So there are lots of these broader questions that are, I think, really in the background of this study, as well as the larger question of what's going to be the most advantageous way to support schools that have been historically underserved within our country, and school turnaround is put forward as one way to really meet the needs to work within these schools.